Okay, and welcome to the Learning Shift, where today I, Mark Nichols, your host, am in conversation with leaders, teachers and change makers, exploring how education is shifting right now. And what it means for the classrooms, the staff rooms, the communities that we love. This is episode 1, so a special welcome if you're new here. Across the series, we'll be leaning into the real work of life, school life. The ideas that move us, the routines that anchor us, and the values that make it all worth doing. Each week during term time, you'll get a fresh episode designed to spark professional curiosity and leave you with something you can try tomorrow. That's the promise. That's the learning shift. A quick note on why this show exists, though. At Avanti Grange, we talk a lot about the whole person, mind, body and soul, and how virtues shape not just behaviour but culture, curriculum and leadership. The podcast, The Learning Shift, is our way of opening that journey up, inviting colleagues near and far into a conversation about building schools of thought and compassion. Professional, yes. Philosophical, sometimes, but always practical. You know, that blend is the heart of our brand voice here. If you're a classroom teacher looking for clear techniques that activate student thinking, you'll hear them here. If you're a middle or senior leader trying to balance ambitious change with day-to-day demands, you'll hear from people living that tension and doing it with integrity. And if you're part of a collaborative group, a subject team, a research cluster, a group of academics that work within the sector, consultants even, use these episodes as shared stimulus for your next CPD session, your next conversation perhaps. That's the listener experience that we are aiming for here. Something that's inspired, connected, challenged and equipped. So what to expect from the season? Well, across the series, we'll stay anchored to 6 pillars. First of all, teaching and learning excellence. Strategies and routines that ensure every student is actively thinking, visibly thinking. The second strand, leadership for change. You know, how vision may become culture. Third strand, the creative curriculum. Creativity as a driver across subjects, it's not just an add-on. Fourth strand, values in action. Virtues lived, not laminated and pasted onto school walls, etc. Fifth is the future of education, so looking at artificial intelligence in particular, sustainability, as well as global perspectives in this interesting age that we all live in. And then, of course, subject-specific CPD. You know, these episodes should be practical deep dives that you can reuse, potentially with your teams in your schools, but a place for you to kind of come to and listen to, you know, professional development happening live in conversations with those curriculum leaders. And on the note of curriculums, actually, you know, these episodes we'll explore curriculum spotlights as well, looking at the curriculum designs that we have here at Avanti Grange and, you know, what makes them so unique and special for this 21st century. So you'll hear from staff at Avanti Grange and beyond, hopefully, experts, new voices and students, because the best learning communities are polyphonic. And the rhythm is quite simple. 1 new episode each week during term time. Mark your podcast app accordingly. If you're using YouTube, where we'll be publishing these videos, you know, like, subscribe, you know, follow us as a school. But I'll be posting on LinkedIn as well, so just make sure that you have any comments, please do comment. Now, today's conversation is the beginning of the shift. To launch the series, you'll listen to this in a moment, but I'm joined by Rhys Jones, who is our current executive principal across the Learning Village in Bishop Stortford. That involves 2 primary schools as well as Avanti Grange. So in about 2 or so minutes, you know, you're going to be listening to this conversation happening, and we're talking about the origins, in this case, of Avanti Grange, how a vision becomes a living culture, and why optimism is not naive but an absolute necessity. We also discuss the milestones that tell us that learning is deepening and flourishing at Grange. Milestones that you may be interested to learn for your own development. But before we get there, I just want to frame the shift that we are talking about. So, you know, that conversation is coming, so please do hang on with me. You just have to listen to me just for a little bit longer. That's all I ask. When we say learning shift, we don't mean a gimmick, an initiative, or just a poster on a wall. We mean the movement, sometimes steady, sometimes sudden, of a community getting clearer about purpose and braver in practice. A shift happens when vision meets action, when virtues aren't only articulated but enacted, when teaching moves from covering content to activating thought. That is the work and that is the journey that we are on as a school. And I'm really proud to be a part of this movement and to be sharing this with you. Just ignore the pips there. I have to remind you, I'm recording from my office. It's actually quite good fun, but that does occasionally mean we have students and pips and whatnot popping their head into to say hello to me. Anyway, at Avanti Grange, that journey is shaped by the Avanti Way, a virtues-led framework that insists that we educate the whole person and build cultures of compassion, curiosity and excellence. The way we timetable, the way we greet students, the way we design curriculum, the way we coach staff, it all flows from that moral centre. If you're listening from another school, you'll hear the through lines. A clarity of purpose, disciplined habits, generous culture, different badges, but the same human work, if you will. Now let me give you the story behind episode 1. When planning to have this conversation, Rhys and I, we knew episode 1 needed to be about beginnings, foundations. So today's conversation with Rhys goes way back to the start, even before I started working for the school. In those moments when Rhys was on his own, essentially, a single person launching the school. But why this school? Why here? How do you nurture culture while building systems? We also discuss, what does optimism look like when the calendar is full, budgets are tight, and the stakes feel so high? Rhys and I also look forward, because a good beginning always contains a map. You'll hear how we think about milestones of success, not just results, but the behaviours, the routines and student experience that produces those great outcomes. If you're mid-build, mid-growth or mid-rethink in your own context, I think, and I genuinely mean this, I think that you'll find this both candid and energising. Listening to Rhys anyway is quite an energising experience, but I'm confident that if you are in the midst of kind of rebranding or rebuilding cultures within your own context, this will be a conversation that may spark off a few ideas for yourselves. Now, come-in attractions, before I jump into that conversation with Rhys, I just want to kind of outline what it is that we've got planned for this half term. So in the next 6 weeks, what is it that you're going to have a taste of, I suppose, from the podcast? Because this is weekly, it is a term time series, I suppose it's really good just to give you a taste of what's coming. So we are going to be exploring virtues at the core, teachers and students on how virtues shape learning moments that matter. So we will be exploring virtues, especially in connection with our curriculums as we go forward. We're going to be exploring teaching that sparks thinking. I will be having conversations with some of my teachers concerning the practical routines that we have established here at Grange to get every brain working in every lesson. We speak about creativity beyond just the arts, speaking specifically to some of my colleagues around creativity, what it looks like in their subject areas. We'll also be having some subject specials looking at some exploration of CPD in those curriculum spotlights. We also do discuss, just look at my notes here, sorry, there is an episode that I'm absolutely looking forward to sharing with you, which is our special take on reading at Avanti Grange, exploring Avanti Grange reads. It's an episode that definitely warms my heart because I have absolutely loved working on this project for the past few years and watching it kind of grow and take shape as the school has developed. So that's a special episode which I know that you guys will enjoy. Now, each of the episode, though, is designed so that you can play it on the drive home from work. It could be commuting to work even. It could be played in a department meeting if you have the time for such things. But generally, just, they're designed for you to just jump in, give it a listen, potentially with one doable thing to try this week, one takeaway perhaps that you may go on to shape your thinking and your thought leadership going into your own settings. Just one more note before we move on to the conversation with Rhys. This is on format as well as the community upon which we're trying to build here. We keep things structured but human. You'll hear an opening spark, the story behind the theme perhaps, a deep dive and practical takeaways that you can implement into your own practice. We'll end each episode with a reflection, potentially an invitation to keep the conversation going on LinkedIn or internally with your teams. Take the conversation that we're having here and move it forward, be a part of that. From episode 2 onward, we'll add a rolling feature where potentially the previous guest poses an opening question to the next one. A light human way to connect episodes and keep that curiosity alive. Setting up for today's interview, in a moment, you'll hear from Rhys Jones, Executive Principal. He's been central to shaping Avanti Grange's vision, building teams and nurturing a culture that's ambitious and kind. In our conversation, we touch upon origins and vision, the story behind the school, the values under the hood. We discuss embracing change with optimism, not as a spin, but as a disciplined hope. We discuss culture building, something that I'm very, very interested in as a school leader myself, looking at the daily habits that make a school feel like a community, as well as those milestones of success that I alluded to earlier. Now, as you listen, I would invite you to consider 2 reflective prompts. Which parts of your current practice are already aligned with your deepest purpose? And where might a small shift create a big gain? Ben Martin will laugh as he's listening to this as I talk about those 1% marginal gains. Those tiny gains could make a big difference when we're talking about shifts in an educational setting. Also, what one virtue, named or unnamed, do you want your students to feel more of in your classroom for the next half term? Hold these questions in your mind as we go through. Now, finally, if this is useful, if you have taken anything away, follow the show, as I said earlier, in your podcast app. Follow, like, subscribe in YouTube. Get in tune and follow us on a weekly basis. As term time drops, as I say, we're going to be releasing 1 episode per week. If you try something from an episode, tell us. Let me know. Share a quick note or a post that shows that you've engaged with this level of CPD. This show is a conversation. It isn't a broadcast, and I really want to kind of stress that to anyone listening to this. If you are out there and you are listening, this is a conversation that I want other educators outside of our context to engage with. Your examples help not just myself, but other teachers take the next step. If you do subscribe, if you do comment, there'll be other teachers that read these, and that could drive the change, drive the sector forward from what we want to achieve, which is to bring a level of professionalism and shift education into the 21st century. If you're an Avanti staff member, across the trust even, remember, these episodes, they double up as CPD fuel. Use them with your teams, capture the takeaways, and build on them in your coaching conversations. Right. So let's get into it. From the beginnings of Avanti Grange to the habits that keep us moving, here's my conversation with Principal Rhys Jones. One. Okay, and welcome to the Learning Shift. This is your host, Mark Nichols. And today we are in conversation with Rhys Jones. Rhys, it was 4 years ago to this day, that I was invited to your office in Avanti Grange Meadows. You invited me in for a cup of coffee after, reaching out to me on LinkedIn. How has it come to this?
Do you know what? That's a question I ask myself quite a lot, Mark, to be honest. It's been a whirlwind ride. It's been an amazing 4 years. Thoroughly enjoyed it. I think, we're not at the end of the journey by any stretch. I think we're right at the start of it. But, what we have achieved together in that 4 years, I think will live with us for a long, long time. I'm very proud of it. And to be honest, it was the start of a pattern that has gone on and still happens today.
I knew from, actually no, I didn't know from the moment I got to Avanti Meadows, because I got there and thought, this is a primary school. Who is this hack that's invited me to a primary school position?
Yeah.
But I remember you coming down, and then within half an hour, I was sold on the vision, and I knew that this would be a place where I wanted to kind of grow as a leader and grow as a practitioner, because I knew that there was something special on our doorstep. Yeah. So I want to take us though, and take the audience to the origins of this journey, because it has been a journey, hasn't it, for the past 3 years.
So take us back to those first days. What were your hopes?
You know, in my mind, I had a vision of what I wanted the school to be, but really it was what I wanted the community to be, and what I wanted the children to experience, but what I wanted the staff to experience. So I think, you know, as educators, obviously we focus hugely on the children, but if we don't get the staff right, if we don't get the staff in the right space, then it becomes really difficult for them to be the best they can be and to provide everything that we need to for children. So, you know, at the time I was sat there, we had no building, we had no staff, we had no children, but we had, like, as soon as we spoke, and this has been replicated with other members of staff over the years, you know, we had this joint vision, this joint purpose, we had this connection about what we wanted education to be. And as soon as we had that in place, with probably 2, 3, 4 people that I'd met in that first period of time before the school opened, a lot of the concerns, a lot of the worries and the pressure sort of went away, because I just knew we were building something different.
So how did like, did you go out and did you find, because I know which staff members you're talking about here, because I still remember that photograph of the original group sat around your table. Did you painstakingly go out to find these staff, or was it just, you know, through your leadership that you managed to communicate, like, this is what we're doing, and then the staff picked up that torch, as it were?
A bit of both. You know, obviously I'd been working in the town for a little while, so I had some connections, and I'd worked in Hertfordshire for a while, which gave me a base. But it was really just spending time with people, you know. And even now, even today, I'm involved in every single interview, every application. I spend the day with the staff who have applied, just to make sure that they are buying into the vision that we're trying to create here. And I always say, I'm not looking for skills, you know, I'm not looking for the best teachers. Obviously, it's great if we can get, you know, the best teachers, but what I'm looking for is a mindset, and that mindset is people who want to grow, want to develop, are positive. You know, I just think optimists, you know, they are the future, you know, because optimists always, they take a chance. They believe that there's better. They think that things can improve. And if you go into anything with an optimistic outcome, the reality is, more times than not, it comes through. And so that's what we're looking for. We're looking for people who really care about children, who have a growth mindset, who value CPD, and are optimistic about the educational future.
Yeah. Optimism aside, because I know that it's an incredibly optimistic environment to be working in. There must have been challenges, like in those early days, like even before you managed to pull those optimists together. What was the challenges there? But then once you had the team together, were there any major challenges in that first year setting the school in motion that you would like to discuss?
I mean, obviously, I was very fortunate that we are part of a trust, and as a result, I had a team from the central services to help with all of that, which was fantastic. There were challenges. I think what challenge might be a really interesting word, because one of the things that we set out from the start was that we were going to challenge everything. So we were going to challenge each other. We were going to challenge the status quo. I didn't really see the point in opening a school that was going to be the same as every other school. I just didn't see that. Didn't excite me. What excited me was trying to do something a bit different and bringing a group of people together from different walks of life, different experiences, and then trying to put that into a melting pot and come out with something truly unique. And like I said, this is a journey. We're not there yet. There's plenty for us to work on, and I'm not saying we are the answer. We're not. But I am saying, we've made big strides in that direction, and it's been a great fun journey to be on.
So it's a reimagining of the educational landscape, isn't it? And that is reimagining what the blueprint can be for schools that are already in existence, but for future schools that are going to be built throughout the next decades. To have that firm basis and to have this experience, it's almost like a project in some ways, isn't it? Like, would you consider yourself like a project kind of orientated person, or?
I think what we did achieve was, and I'm not sure if this is because of the situation we were in, but we seemed to recruit and have on board a large number of staff who were very comfortable with change. And that's not the norm. Everybody says change is painful, change is difficult. People worry about change. And that's true, and I can see that. But actually, when and even now, I know we had the originals, and over the years we've added people and added people. But this is what I'm saying here is as much about the people who joined September 25 as those who joined. It was people who were comfortable with change and saw change as an opportunity, not a threat.
Yes. Yeah.
And wanted to embrace that change, because what that leads to is people who are never satisfied. We always, we had our Ofsted and all of that, and that's not the important thing. But after that, in the next governors and SSC sort of joint meeting, there was very little patting on the back. There might have been a 5-minute well done. And then we went through the development plan, and we didn't speak about anything that was green. We just spoke about the ambers and the reds. And I remember there was somebody observing that governors meeting because they were thinking of joining the SSC, and they came to me after at the end of the meeting. They said, for a school that's just done that, there was the focus on the next step was quite stark, and that's what it excites me. I can't wait to see what our GCSEs look like, what our sixth form looks like. And that's not me, that's our collective. Everybody's got ownership of that. We always say here we put a huge emphasis on culture, and we say it doesn't matter if it's your first day in a school or your 1,000th, where you are on the hierarchy, inverted commas, of school leadership. If you've got an idea, I want to hear about it, and we're going to enact it.
Well, that's quite important, really. It leads me into our next question anyway. You were talking about this idea of culture. I know you've alluded to it through what you've discussed so far, but just thinking about, and for me, from my experience of working here, the culture is something that has been at the centre of what we pivot around, if that makes sense. So every year there has been change, the increase, doubling our staff, year on year. That brings with it a whole host of change.
Yeah.
Then you have the change in building, for example. Those early challenges when we were on the top floor of a primary, and then we're in the partial building for the second year. You've got the change of space, and then you've got the change of leadership, the change of responsibilities. You have all of this change that's taking place in the school, but it's the culture that is something that we band around. So I don't know if you want to elaborate on how you engineer that culture as a school principal.
I think the inset day from memory that we moved into the main building, but as you said there, we only had less than half of it, probably a third of it at the time. And we did it, and I did my inset. It was about a Maori proverb, which is everything has changed, but nothing has changed. And we sort of reflected on it as a group, and everything had changed. Like you said, the building, the number of staff had over doubled, the number of children had more than doubled. We had to find our way through a building site effectively, and everything you can imagine. Suddenly, people were managing people for the first time because we hadn't had departments. Now suddenly we've got 2 or 3 English teachers. All of these sorts of changes. But actually, nothing fundamental had changed because the culture was set and stayed the same. Yeah. The values, the purpose, our goal to create spiritually compassionate change makers, the way we worked with each other, our trademark behaviours, our cultural code, all of that was the same. So actually, I hope that the idea of the messaging at least was that to reassure people, bricks and mortar and numbers and that, but as a collective, we're more than that. Yeah. And it's our culture and ethos which pulls us together.
And it's not just in terms of setting the culture; it's the nurturing of that culture over time as well. I think I speak from my perspective, seeing you take the leadership as well as the rest of the leadership team, for that matter, and for other advocates and teachers around the school and the kids. In fact, everybody, we all take that culture and we cherish it, we nurture it to the point where it grows and becomes integral to what it means to work in this building.
And I think it's intentional. That's the word that always comes to it. So many organisations, whether they're a school or a multinational or whatever, they leave culture to chance. And we've never done that. We've done a lot of reading around it as a group, and we've brought in things from lots of experts about our culture. But we're very intentional. And we hold each other to it as well, So we say things like, have you assumed good intent? You know, have you spoken to that person? Or are you coming straight to a line manager?
And these are cultural norms.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
aren't they? These are just normal parts of the daily,
Yeah.
happenings at Avanti Grange.
Yeah, staying humble, full transparency, and all of those things are really important to us because, like I say, it's not a top-down hierarchical. You've got to do this. It grows everywhere, and the children reflect it. Which is probably more than we could ever hope for. The children reflect that culture. They reflect that ethos, and I really do think they are going to go out and make the world a better place, which has always been our goal.
Yeah, yeah. Just before we finish this, the first half of this program, this cast, is there any one particular milestone that has stood out to you? Like, think for the past 3 years, like one milestone where you felt that the culture at Avanti Grange, has really took its shape. Is there any one moment that you think that's the moment where I know that this is going to be a success? Because I would imagine, in your position, it's a huge gamble, a huge risk, starting up a new school. But what was that one moment where you're like, I've got this?
And I think that that gamble goes to everybody, because it's all very. I mean, I always say this, but in our first year, we managed to convince 120 parents to choose Avanti Grange. They at the time we had, like I said, no building,
Great salesmanship.
Well, yeah, and hopefully they feel rewarded for that decision because, as we know, and I always say this, the schools in Bishop Stortford and the surrounding are phenomenal. You can't make a bad decision. All of that, and so for some 120 parents put their faith in us, I think that means a lot. Was there a moment? I think a lot of people would have said the Ofsted result and the fact that we achieved that, but actually that wasn't really the moment for me. It might be because it's fresh in my mind, but this academic year, 2 members of staff have come to me, one who's been here a very long time and one who literally started in September, and have both come to me and said that the school has changed their life for the positive. Both of them said they doubt they would still have been in education if they hadn't found Avanti Grange, or Avanti Grange had found them. And they spoke about this sense of belonging, this sense of purpose, this sense of, looking after each other and caring for each other, when it changed it had a positive impact on their health, had a positive impact on their home life, whatever, and that's surely, that's the bit I'm proud of, because teaching's incredibly difficult. Working in any, whatever role, support staff, teaching staff in a school is exceptionally hard. It asks so much of you. And when you work in a school that wants to be the best, we ask more in some ways, but in other ways, we do it in a way that is person-centered. So they get the opposite,
It's that sense of working the hardest that we've ever worked in our lives, yet not feeling like you worked at all.